Welcome to Black Manifesto, Part 2, Aftermaths. Nora envisages 10 more commandments of the Black Manifesto that recognises not just a moment in time, but a continued need to keep action and activism alive. In this podcast, hosted by myself, Pawlet Brookes, and created by Serendipity Institute for Black Arts and Heritage, Black women from around the world respond to Nora's provocations, addressing how we shape a new world in which Black women are seen and heard. The guests on this podcast share their reflections unapologetically, so please be aware of strong language and references to personal struggles and traumas. Black Manifesto centres and amplifies the voices of Black women in their own words. This episode contextualises the fifth commandment on loadshedding, climate and non-human activists, and another empty frontier. Africans populate the Mediterranean Sea. Wake up.
Hi.
Welcome, Dorothy, and good afternoon. Can you just introduce yourself and your work, please?
So they call me Munyaneza, Dorothéé, and I'm from Rwanda. This is where I grew up. Though I spent 14 years in London, and now I'm reaching 15 years in France, and currently based in the south of France, in Marseille. I would say that I am a multidisciplinary artist, movement-based, particularly movement-based, and also music is very important in my work, as well as text. So I guess, yes, I am a choreographer, musician, writer, quite a few things, I would say.
I think having a holistic approach to your work is very much something that is born out of Africa and African work and African sort of ideology. But what role do you think art and particularly dance plays in communicating crisis?
Well, particularly at the moment, we're going through a lot of turmoil in the world, aren't we? There are very disheartening situations happening in the Middle East, in Palestine, in the Congo, in Sudan, even here in France or over there in the UK. There's so much that is going on that resembles and is particularly a crisis situation. And dance, for me, plays a role in as long as it comes to communicate the quake, the earthquakes, the shake, and the moments that we are being completely shattered. And how do we weave our pieces together? How do we weave our stories together, even in those moments of chaos, even in those moments of crisis? And movement, for me, is a tool in communicating that which is happening in the world, because for me, art is part of the world, or is an act of belonging to the world and witnessing the world on stage, off stage. It's a continual act of commitment to the world.
And in terms of this continued act of commitment, when we look back and we talk about crisis, you think about Africans populate the Mediterranean Sea. And this might be seen like forced displacement and migration from Africa to Europe. Can you touch on that a little bit for me in terms of your work?
So when I moved to Europe, back then the UK was still in the European Union. So let's say that when I moved to Europe, my mother was working in London since 1993. And we came in the summer of 1994. So that was after the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Actually, this year we are going to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the genocide committed against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And so often enough, people think that my coming to London with my siblings and my father was a forced migration, because it somehow falls in the timing post the genocide of the Tutsi. However, it was something that my parents had planned to do, to move to London, since my mother had this job that she was working in London. But I am, of course, very sensitive to those who cross seas, those who have been forced, who have been taken, ripped from the continent over so many centuries. It's not even just about the Mediterranean right now. It's how are we to consider those who perish on the waters, those whose lives end in these waters. What then? What happens of their memory? What shroud do we have for them? What commemoration can we put into place to remember them and to honor them? And the ones who are actually moving today, because even in my intimate sphere, in my home in Marseille, we have decided to host young unaccompanied men and girls and boys who are coming from sub-Saharan countries into Europe. Because there's an association actually here in Marseille that works with them, particularly with these young unaccompanied people. And it's horrific what they go through. The journeys that they take, it's dangerous to go through the desert, to cross borders even of certain countries. And once they manage to survive the Mediterranean Sea, which is very nearby where I live, because I live in the south of France, it's still a nightmare to find a home within these European countries. So having myself, of course, as I explained, it's not something that was forced, but I know what displacement means, what it means to leave your home, to leave your bearings, to leave your people, to leave your community, and to have to go and settle somewhere else. And what does this new rootedness or rootlessness mean? And these beings who are sometimes surviving the seas and the waves and the salt. There's a beautiful text that Asma Jama, a poet I worked with a couple of years ago, talks about iodine and the beings that become iodine, and how this salt eats away the memories and the bodies of these people who have stories, who have lives, who have breaths, who have lived, and who's there to remember them, who's telling their stories. How can we keep telling our stories but also remembering their stories? So the Mediterranean for me is this border or borderless space, because under the water borders meet, lands meet. Under the water, the earth's meet, the earth's surface meets. And I'm always looking out into the sea and wondering who's out there, whose stories are being halted midway or mid-flight in search of a land to call their own, or their new land, or their new home.
So you use your body to tell the stories of individuals and some of these collective memories that you've talked about. In what way can dance share emotions where other art forms cannot?
Yes. When I began in this field, I was a musician. I was solely a musician. I was collaborating with choreographers, and one of them with whom I really started, François Verret, who's a French choreographer, invited me as a musician, as a singer. And after 4 collaborations, he asked me to dance. And I didn't have, at that point, let's say, Western training, like dance training, though I have been trained by my grandmothers particularly, and my community back home in Rwanda when I was younger. So dance has always been there as a language for me. And so today, I would say that music and dance have become almost equal. They are equal in how I use these two languages to tell stories, to tell my intimate individual story or a collective of stories from African or African descendant beings. But dance has, you know how languages, we are forced to translate them, or, you know, when we translate, we introduce another language, we introduce another form of speaking. But movement has another vocabulary that spans over these seas that we were talking about. Like recently when I was going to Colombia, for example, and I met the Afro-Colombians there, or back in the day when I was in Brazil and I meet Afro-Brazilians or African-Americans from the United States, there are languages there, even though music also has this language. Huh? And when I collaborate with musicians, I also find links to the continent, to the African continent. But this, the movement, or let's say the way the body moves and speaks, has no borders, it has a specificity depending on where you grew up and who trained you or who didn't, or whether you trained yourself. There are specific ways of using the body or speaking with the body, but the body has this tremor. It has this way of moving for me that communicates beyond spoken words or even the singing voice, because it's always that for me. How does one move into the other? How can I weave the moving body that sings and speaks, and how the word becomes a cry, and the cry movement yet again? It's a never-ending circle.
But how do you create and how do you nurture a safe environment for the artists working with you to be able to explore their feelings of their own experiences?
That's a good one too. It's true that I'm particularly drawn to artists who have lived many lives, or who have lived, I would say, I end up discovering more and more when I'm talking with them, of course, but in the moment I don't know how traumatized they are, or how big a trauma they've gone through. So I know that the space I'm creating for the work is a space of care, is a space where radical love can operate, where healing is taking place. And caring for these artists and collaborators is not just merely through the creative aspect of the work, but it's also finding time to listen, like asking questions, taking time to listen, provoking an exchange through ritual, talking about, like the same day, for example, I ask them what is their weather, you know, what is their inner weather, what is their emotional weather, what is their physical weather. So to put words somehow between us, or to lay down into words, into the work, to offer into the work how they're doing in order to care for them, because care is important, particularly when addressing the subjects that I address, which are often, I would say, heavy materials. So as I don't want to create even more trauma by revisiting certain wounds, or revisiting certain histories, or certain forms of resistance, I want us to grow in love. I think it's an act of love, and love is that space that from which I want to also create with them. So the care is rooted in love. I guess that's what I'm trying to do, is give as much radical love as possible.
So if the care is rooted in love and it's radical love, how does that work, and what does collaboration then mean?
Respect, deep respect for my collaborators, knowing that the journey that has brought us together makes sense, like trusting the steps that we each took to meet each other. Because somehow it doesn't just fall out of the blue. We have all had a life before that moment of meeting, because that's what it's about for me also. It's encounters. These encounters happen in a specific time, in a specific place. So respecting the journeys and the experiences that my collaborators have had thus far is key. And through that respect, is honoring their craft, honoring their what they're bringing to the project. And although I'm the one, for example, leading them, or let's say the one who's manifesting the need to collaborate with them, or manifesting the invitation, but this invitation is in itself a need to meet, to continue, to find ways to weave together our stories, to weave together our forms of resistance. And the craft, whether it's through choreography, through music, through poetry, it's about this respect, like respecting each other and the fire that burns within.
Okay, you started to touch on this one in terms of respect and the fire within, but why is it important to create spaces of knowledge exchange, especially in spaces where the dialogue is spoken through the language of movement?
I think this question of respect and dialogue is key, because even when we don't speak, because I've always somehow worked with people who don't speak the same languages as me, and this exchange of knowledge is who we are. In these spaces that we inhabit, in whether it's in Europe or in Africa or South America or North America, the knowledge is what makes us, whether it's been transmitted from our ancestors, from our grandmothers, from our parents, from our educators, from our teachers. This space of knowledge is making us even more strong, even more, like, we become undoubtedly formidable and powerful when we exchange knowledge, when we what we hold, it is not just merely for oneself. It becomes truly a weapon. If we were to resist a system, when we exchange knowledge, there is that space of resistance and empowerment. So in the body, in the choreography, we all have these journeys, as I say, these experiences that fashion and mold us and make us. And when we share this knowledge, I'll give you an example. For example, I was working with Radwan Muniziga. He's a Amazigh man from North Morocco, and he was telling me about knowledge from his people in Northern Africa. And I realized that in sharing his knowledge, which I didn't know or I felt far removed from, ended up being so close to what my own ancestors have taught me. And through the rhythm, through the way we tap our feet, or the way we even like think of horns and these ancestral cows and like goats, this sharing of knowledge became something that made us even more powerful in how I moved and danced in this solo piece he was creating for me. So yeah, I believe that the sharing of knowledge comes to inhabit us and empower us in how we move and inhabit the spaces we move within.
Okay, I think it'd be nice just to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the work that you've created.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, I wanted to talk about your most recent work. I'm not sure I've got the pronunciation right. I think it's Umuko.
Umuko.
Umuko, yeah. And Umuko gives a voice to young Rwandan artists to celebrate their creativity and freedom. Can you talk about this piece and what it means to provide a platform for young people?
The young people are the future. They're the present. They're the future. I don't even know if I'm actually creating a platform for them. I'm just acting as a vehicle, as a vessel. But yes, Umuko is going to premiere in May, actually, in Paris. Though I really cared to have a pre-show in Rwanda last month in February in Kigali, because it was important for me, for my people to also see it back home. And it's true that in this piece, Umuko is actually a name of a tree, an indigenous tree in Rwanda. And this tree always fascinated me when I was a young girl. I would ask my grandmother what was its name, what did it do, because it's truly remarkable. It has like these flamboyant red flowers, a little bit like the jumper I'm wearing, like really beautiful red flowers. And because the hills of Rwanda are particularly green, so it really stands out. It's spectacular. It's a really spectacular tree. And while I was thinking about my next work, because I had just finished premiering another piece on the figure of Tituba, the one who was judged for witchcraft in the 17th century. I thought going back would be good. Going back home to Rwanda would be good. And going back to the land and to the soil, and deeper than the soil, actually, going deeper than the roots would be good. And that's when the tree came back to me, Umuko. It's never really left me, to be honest. Umuko never really left me, even though I've been living away from this land for almost 30 years. Yes, almost 30 years. And Umuko, in Umuko, I gather 5 young performance artists, dancers, and 2 musicians. So 3 dancers and 2 musicians, although everybody is actually dancing in the show. And for me, the reason I chose them is because they are very much connected to the land and connected to the culture. But at the same time, absolutely in the future. So there is something they are it's like I'm almost being at in the face of, or having the privilege to see what people of the future look like by seeing them and working with them. And so I could not resist collaborating with them. When I met them, I was so attracted to their craft and so attracted to their mind and the way they were thinking and working through their dances and their voices and their musics. I had to collaborate with them. And young people, for me, it's this question again of sharing knowledge. You know, the experiences I've had, I cannot, again, keep them for myself, particularly when it comes to artists from home. I feel like there is a responsibility also to share that kind of knowledge, and to collaborate is a form of, or is manifesting that engagement. I'm not saying that I'm not transmitting anything to the young generations here in Europe, but it makes sense. It made sense for me to collaborate with these 5 artists for this particular work.
I think the work is really, really interesting, because at the heart of it is your heritage. So your heritage lies at the heart of the work, and it's got the voice of the past. So you've got these intergenerational voices. How do you use the past and currently the present to equip us to better understand where we are now? You know, because we talked at the top of this conversation about crisis.
Well, I think it's well, maybe it's because that's how I was taught or grew up. One needs to know one's history, or one needs to know where we come from in order to be aware of where we are right now. How do we behave? How do we actively engage with the present? So for me, going to the past is true. It's a form of equipping myself for the present, but also for the future, because it's like having tools or having the means to be, the means to manifest oneself in the moment, in this body, because the body has so much memory. The body carries so much memory. Some of it we know quite with intention, and some of it has been transmitted without even us being aware of it, particularly traumas, for example. There are certain things that have been passed down from generation to generation. How do we address it in the present if we don't know? If nobody told us even? It's not even just the responsibility of us going to search for what happened in the past. Is who is there to tell us? Who is there to witness the past when maybe they've all been killed, for example? When you wipe out a whole group of people, how does the present become even possible? How do you envision the present moment when there is no one to testify about what happened? And an act of creation is somehow a testimony. We are testifying about certain historical events or people. We can even make up certain histories so that we can better deal with the present moment. Mythologies, and we create a whole myth. We create legends. We create griots. And today we are going through crisis everywhere, particularly as again in Palestine or in the Congo or in Sudan. And when I talk to people from the European countries that I go to sometimes, and they're like, "Oh, I'm not concerned, it's far from me." And I'm like, "No, you don't know your history. You better get to learn your history. You better get to know that what is happening if you're, for example, a Belgian citizen, what is happening in the Congo, you cannot say that it's not connected to your life today or to the lives of those to come if you don't realize, or if you don't learn or educate yourself about what your people did in the Congo during the colonial era." So, and it's these moments of how do we tackle injustices? How do we tackle powerlessness? How do we tackle poverty? How do we tackle even like environmental crises if we don't learn from indigenous people, if we don't learn about what happened to them when, for example, the Americas were invaded by Europeans? It's a constant. We as people, we as we need to constantly be engaged in this consciousness, in this act of remembering, this act of commemorating, this act of actively, like, sorry, I'm repeating myself, but we had to activate space and memory and to tell our stories unedited so that the future, those to come, will know that we were not afraid.
So given the politicization of your body in terms of carrying a history and a memory and activating, how do you think your work has evolved with your interaction with other artists and dancers and choreographers? Because you're carrying you're carrying quite a story, quite a history, and then you're colliding with others. How's your work evolved as a consequence of that?
Yes, thank you. It's true that my first work with my company was an autobiographical piece in 2014, where I was telling basically what we went through in 1994. But also what was there, who was there before that, like my friends, my schoolmates, and everything that changed on the 6th of April 1994. This is the space that I'm telling the story from, the work. And then I shifted a little bit from being autobiographical into stories of other women from Rwanda, from the Congo, from Syria, like, because I was tackling the situation of rape and sexual violence as a weapon of war. So I expanded. I left my own body and my own story to reach other women's voices, even though it was I on stage with my collaborator, musician and composer Holland Andrews and Alamae. So then with the next piece, I was actually tired. I think I became ill. It was a very intense tour, and emotionally and physically demanding. So I was like, how do I create something after this? How can I continue to look into, I would say, stories that move me, literally move me, put me into motion, but also move my heart. And the more I was going towards the Americas, the more I met people of African descent, and the wider the community became. Because before I was, I think, in this binary relationship between France and Rwanda, or Europe and Africa, between white man and black woman, like this binary way of viewing the world. And then I went across the sea. I went across the ocean and started to meet incredible, phenomenal, creative artists from the Americas. And that's when I thought, okay, how do I talk about the dispersed? How do I get into this moment, or this how far do we go into memory when there's been a rupture, when there's been this number of people who have been taken from the mother continent. And so this is where I began to really, really work and collaborate with African Americans from the Americas, basically, and the Caribbean. It was wonderful. It actually started to heal this question of the past again, because I felt disconnected from the African, the people of African descent. Because it felt far. It felt like they were far. But the more I went there and the more we spoke, the more connected I felt to this. It's like being part of a fabric, you know? And so far, I felt like I was just one thread. And then I started to see that we are all part of the same tapestry. And this brought me so much joy and so much strength, even though it was a piece that, with my collaborators, it was also woven in pain, because, you know, the stories that come from this, it is like we were torn. So we inherit this hair. But which is the work, is really about weaving our stories together again, like weaving certain stories together again to become this family, as Yinka Esi Grace once put it, the mangrove family. You know, we are rooted in many spaces. So for me, the collaboration on this question of transmission and remembering has changed me from of course, my core is Rwandan. Let's say my core being is absolutely Rwandan, and at the same time, it's expanding because of who's coming in and who's adding their voice, their color, their movement, their story to mine. And so it's my heart is expanding literally, and I'm being moved deeply, politically speaking, but also emotionally and spiritually and artistically. I've got a pile of books I'm always reading from different authors and trying to really nourish that. I'm actually being nourished. And this makes me feel taken care of too by the community and empowered.
So then finally, the theme of this year's Black Manifesto is aftermaths.
Mm.
So thinking about the last few years, what lessons can you share about growth after adversity?
I don't know why water keeps coming back to mind when I'm throughout this whole conversation, but growth is for me honoring, a question of honoring the living, every living thing, and the shock that we can go through, the even moments of oblivion. I feel that the gesture, the radical, this radical act of love or art, through music, through the voice, when we let them resound and tell our stories, something is happening. And for me, the act of creating and as a transformative force, there is how do we manifest? How do we even continue to be in the aftermath? Once we've been shaken, is it even possible to imagine, to dream, to grow after adversity? I, for a very long time, didn't know whether it would be possible to survive the trauma that we went through in 1994. But I met people who walked with me and who spoke life into me, whether it was through poetry, whether it was through literally just saying, we see you, we hear you, we acknowledge you. So even being here in this body is a form of being in the aftermath, is a form of existing after adversity. Leaning into joy is a form of standing and living after adversity, and carving through memory for me, shaping tomorrow, being present in the now, because we are, after all, we are in the aftermaths. We are still, of course, in the shock. Some of us are still going through shock waves and shocking situations, but being in the now, knowing that we are still breathing, we are still moving, we are still able to see the sky, because so many people are perishing right now under bombs, under gunshots, under police brutality, and in the sea. There is so much that is still turning. There is so much turmoil. So we are not, I don't know if there is an aftermath, Ashley. I don't know if we are already in the aftermath, because it's ongoing. It's like Ifede, with whom I worked back in May, we were talking about resilience. You know how people always talk about resilience, and they said we talk about resilience when we are out of the situation. But how do we talk about resilience when it's the situation, the adversity is ongoing? Are we still resilient in that adversity? So for me, the aftermath is, of course, linked in my personal experience, for example, to 1994. So I am in the aftermaths of that, but there are other situations that make me feel like I'm in a continuous aftermath. And so being here in the now, manifesting my belonging to this fabric of beings, to this family of creatives, somehow pulverizes the obstacles and creates or testifies to the voices that are still resounding and through the storm, because those voices are urgent. Those voices are unrushed and jubilant, and the flesh on top of these bones manifest the violence, of course, that one can live through, but also the beauty from now and the years past. I believe that we are carriers of so many testimonies of resistance, and being in the now is thinking about the aftermaths.
I think my takeaway, and I have to thank you, is that within all this darkness and terror, that we still have the ability, to use your phrase, to be leaning into joy. Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. In the next episode, we'll explore the commandment, you say art, I say heart, exists in the margins, outside the frame, the freedom of the non-canon. Thank you for listening. You can read more about the Black Manifesto in Black Ink. Published by Serendipity Institute for Black Arts and Heritage, Black Ink is an annual magazine bringing together artists from across the African Caribbean diaspora and Indigenous communities to discuss Black arts, heritage and cultural politics.